My favorite character throughout all of DC Comics is the Flash. Always has been. My dad loved him. I loved him, and it's really due to the fact that most of the things about him are pretty scientifically accurate. Now I know what you're thinking. That seems kind of crazy. I mean, there's a lot of things he does that didn't seem realistic. You're right, but I'm not talking about it from the standpoint of, let's say, a real world thing. I'm talking about if it were to be realistic, these powers that he has, could all the things he does be possible? And technically speaking, yes. Now, I want to make sure we talk about this real quickly. Number one, we're going to really focus mostly on Barry Allen. Number two, we're not going to dive a whole lot into the Speed Force because while I would love to do more of that here, there's another video coming up that'll explain it a lot more that ultimately I can't do in this video because there's so much to talk about for that. So we might mention Speed Force in passing, but it won't be a big deal here. So, now to be fair, Barry's ability to move really quickly is unrealistic. It doesn't happen. But if it were to be real, the things he does with that power from the Speed Force, of course, does give him this ability to do what he does. Now, in real world terms, Usain Bolt is the fastest man alive, the fastest man to ever live. He can move just under 20 miles an hour at his top speed. That's a pretty impressive speed for a human being. Scientists believe we probably will only be able to reach 30 miles an hour one day, but 40 is the maximum that human beings will likely ever reach. And that's with genetic editing and everything added in. It's a very small amount of speed considering all the things we can do. But someone like Bolt, for example, he reached that speed in a sprint. Very similar to the animal kingdom where, say, cheetahs, for example, that can move at the top speed of 70 miles per hour, they're also sprinters. But they don't maintain their speed very long either. Now, usually the top speed they reach, typically, is somewhere between 40 to 50 miles per hour on a normal basis, because they can maintain that a little longer. But their top speed of 70 miles per hour, they barely ever reach that, nor would it, once they reach it, would they ever stay there very long, because that takes so much ability to reach and then to maintain it. Very, very difficult. So most animals, most human beings, do not reach our top speed, especially very long, and if we did, our bodies would begin to break down at a certain period of time. Like, that's why, for example, if you were to run around for so long, your legs are gonna start hurting you and things like that. And that's the thing that joggers and marathoners have to deal with for a long time, like shin splints, things like that. That's gonna be even worse for someone like Barry Allen, you'd think. But he's protected by the Speed Force, so ultimately, that gives him extra durability, extra healing powers. So because of those factors that he's offered, he can move a lot faster for a longer period of time than a human being normally should be able to do. Now, what is the speed that normally a human being could go before we start to cook ourselves alive? Normally it's a little over 3,800 miles an hour, because it's somewhere around Mach 5. That's when we start to reach around 1,500 degrees in friction temperatures that we would create, and that's around about what we use to cremate each other. So, once you reach a certain cremation level of speed, that's a huge problem. This is why Barry has to wear a certain type of suit that allows him to move without his clothes burning off of him, because ultimately, his clothing couldn't maintain that. A certain type of clothing that we wear, like the National Space Shuttles use, like those could handle incredibly high speeds because they're meant to be in space and move throughout space in that territory. But also, these shuttles that come down into the world, and they were on 70,000. Yeah, I think when they come out of the shuttles down to the Earth, they reach roughly around 17,000 miles per hour. So it's a huge speed. So ultimately, reaching these Mach levels with that type of clothing on would be easy. The one thing that I don't like about the comics and the movies and even the anime shows is that they have him reaching these top speeds while carrying somebody who's not protected by anything. We kind of use the idea that they're protected by the Speed Force around them, but if that were the case, wouldn't Barry's clothing still not be burnt? So you can't have it both ways, guys. You can't say one thing's cool, one thing's not. It doesn't work that way. So that's something that I don't like about it, and that's where the realism kind of goes against the grain. But, for example, if you had him doing the stuff he does in CW all the time for the Flash show there, where he can create these wind tunnels or create these little funnels of things like that, take oxygen away because of it, take everything around away because of it, those things are realistically possible, and that scientific ability of doing those things would definitely suck those things away, so that could happen. The ability to kind of move through walls through intangibility abilities, technically speaking, if he can move at the speeds he can move, that's possible because your atoms are being broken down into little bits, so you could do that. It's a weird thing, but possible. Though I don't know if it could break through walls that way. It could definitely go through vents that way. So there's a little bit of weirdness there, but definitely a possibility to think about. So that's technically there. On top of that, too, to reach these high speeds that he's able to reach, is definitely due to the Speed Force giving him the power to do it. But that ability to reach these certain speeds are very, very possible. People always talk about the idea, too, of Superman and Flash, going into a race. Who would win? Well, Flash would. Why are we discussing it? Number one, Flash is the fastest man alive because of it. I mean, he got the Speed Force on his side. So Superman cannot run for a certain period of time, even with his superhuman abilities from the sun, because eventually he will begin to break down, so his top speed couldn't be maintained for as long. But if Barry wanted to cheat, he could open up a portal through the Speed Force and meet Clark at the finish line. Because Clark is not a speedster. Speedsters are the only people we know in these cases that can do those things, because speedsters are literally people with access to the Speed Force. Those who run really quickly don't necessarily have them part of that. So Quicksilver, for example, who can move really quickly, could not move as fast as the Flash could, but definitely moves really quickly. But he cannot do everything that the Flash can do. It's very important to understand that, because it's kind of misunderstood. So that Speed Force ability also gives him other powers that are problematic. Now, if a Speed Force were realistic, if it was a thing, it would open up a similar way to a wormhole or a portal would. And technically, we know, scientifically speaking, on a theoretical end of it, we know that extra dimensions like multiverse is possible. We know that there's a way to access those things. We just don't have access to it yet. We don't know how to do it, but there is a way of doing it. We also know that speed technically is part of those things because it's part of a universal force situation. Gravity is part of that. Like, there's so many things there that are realistically possible through a theoretical end of it because we just cannot do it yet. So if it were to be real, yeah, the way they do it is pretty accurate because he reaches a certain speed and then has access to it. And then he goes into that sector and then can choose where he wants to go through a dimensional area or through a certain past territory, because once the thing was invented once, it's invented throughout all of time. And we'll discuss that more in a specifically Speed Force video. But Barry going back in time changes a lot of things. Like Flashpoint, that was caused by Barry going back in time and changing his reality. He went back and changed something he changed things by going back in time to save his mom. And so by saving his mom from dying, he changed all of his own reality. And you can't change your reality for too long or anything like that, because once you change it one time, you make a crack in reality. Even going back in time and fixing your problem, you're never going to change what you created because there's always going to be a fracture. So that ability to the Speed Force, sometimes those things are going to break down on you. So Flash's abilities and those real world consequences in that way, eventually, if there's a force of some kind, it's going to have its own physics control. Meaning that physics territory will say you can only do something for so long before something breaks and cracks, and you cause yourself to be put in a hole. Theoretically, if there's something that can affect time and space, yeah, it'll crack. It would have to. And it would fold in on itself. Like kind of how we saw happening eventually in the DC Comics world. That was probably aided a lot by Flash's thing. So all the things we saw, these universal powers that we saw that were just dying off, all these universes coming to one because of Flash's abilities, not necessarily, but because of Flash's abilities and what he did in the past and everything else, yeah, if the Speed Force was around 100% and never been changed, that wouldn't occur. So things like that are definitely the reason why Flash is of critical importance to the DC Comics world. But more importantly, all speedsters are. Flash's powers from everything he does that we see in the comic world is technically accurate if someone were to have his powers. Though how he gets them, the realistic possibilities of all the things he does with those powers, things are somewhat a bit off, because ultimately speaking, you can do all those things if you have the powers, but how you got them, I don't know if that's exactly how it would work. I don't think lightning does it that way, so there's a lot of things there that are a little bit kind of muddy in the water. But if it were to be real that he has those powers, most of what you see, scientifically accurate. Minus this whole thing about, carrying someone that is at your top speed and they don't burn up. Just there's some issues there. Other than that, Flash is pretty good.